What is going on tonight on the Cover One Buffalo podcast? You are going to be checking out Alex Brasky, the editor for the Batavia Daily, giving us the latest on what's going on at Buffalo Bills training camp and what to watch for in this first preseason opener. But first, our guys at Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia Worldwide with Greg Tompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL.
Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett. And since I'm without my partner in crime, I had to find the next most handsome man in Buffalo Bills media, Alex Brasky. Alex, how are we doing?
Well, Greg, and you know what? I think I'd rank myself above Aaron. I don't know in intelligence, but I think looks. I think I may have him beat.
I like it. I like the confident approach to the evening. So it's been great. We got to spend a little bit of time together while you were covering camp, and I found out a little something about you. So people obviously see your coverage all the time from your work with the Batavia Daily and all the different coverage at camp and everything you have going on there. But I won't lie, I was kind of excited when I heard you were taking over the role as the editor for Bills Digest. Tell us a little bit about that coming back.
Yeah, really excited to get started with Bills Digest. It was an opportunity that I really couldn't pass up, a long-standing publication. It goes back to the Shout days, which you mentioned before we hopped on here, the Shout magazine. Now, obviously, Bills Digest, a little bit different, but still pumping out the Bills coverage as they have since 1991, since the Super Bowl years. Brian Spindler and Dave Altman have really done a great job organizing that organization, and really a tough act to follow. And Mark Ludwizak and the former editor before Mark, Chris Brown, who is now the interim play-by-play man and all things Buffalo Bills for BuffaloBills.com. So certainly two tough acts to follow there. I got a lot to live up to, but certainly excited to hit the ground running and see what I'm capable of here, following in those big shoes to fill.
Yeah, I can't wait. Like I said, I was a big fan, always checking out Shout, especially living in the Southern Tier. It's a lot of how I would consume a lot of the information when I was coming up. So excited to see what you do with it there. But let's talk about this Bills team here. So obviously there's been a handful of different things coming into camp, and we'll kind of go in a couple different directions. I know for anybody who didn't, you can check in the show description here. We'll have Alex's takeaways here that were in the daily news with the latest from camp takeaways. Why don't we start with a little bit broader picture before we get into it? You've been there every day, all this hype over Dalton Kincaid, and people kind of getting maybe a little overexcited for it. I had a hard time tamping down people's expectations because I was pretty impressed myself. Where do you think it falls in maybe what your expectations were coming in, and now how that hype is built around him?
My expectations were relatively high coming in, but I would say he's exceeded all of those expectations. I would say the hype is real at this point with Dalton Kincaid. The only minor miscue that I've seen from him throughout training camp are a few missed blocks during their kind of isolation blocking drill on the perimeter, and that's putting a rookie in a tough position during his first training camp. You saw Dawson Knox come into the league and struggle with blocking initially. He's since become an adequate blocker at the professional level. So still a long way to go for Kincaid in that respect, but his pass catching ability, route running ability, comfortability within the offense, that is all real. All that you've heard from all the reports, that is real. The hype is real surrounding Dalton Kincaid, and he's going to be heavily utilized within this offense, and I think he's going to come through in spades for this offense, and they really need him to, and they're looking for big things out of their rookie tight end.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to monitor, and I don't know what that's going to lead to. I've had a lot of people in the fantasy football space asking questions about it, and I don't know exactly where that's going to go, whether he'll get enough catches for it to matter immediately from a fantasy football standpoint. But the idea that he's going to be kind of brought along slowly in the references of like a rookie tight end space. I think the Bills record is from Dawson Knox, and I think it was like 38 catches. I feel pretty confident we're going to have a new rookie record in catches for Kincaid, and I don't know exactly if it'll be from the first moment of game one, but I don't think it's crazy, but by the end of the year, he could be fighting for number 2 targets in this offense. I think that he has that kind of potential for where it is, and it's just how fast he can get to that potential.
Yeah, and just the way that they've been utilizing him during training camp, just the rapport that he's built with Josh Allen immediately. It seems like, I mentioned it before, that comfortability for Kincaid is there, but also for Josh Allen to throw to that rookie target. Sometimes with an experienced quarterback that's had a lot of success in the league, might be tough to trust a rookie coming into the league and being utilized in the offense as heavily as I expect him to be utilized. But I think that comfortability between quarterback and pass catcher is there. We've seen it throughout training camp. Allen has gone to Kincaid early and often since day one, kind of at all levels of the field. They really like to go to connect with one another over the middle, but we've also seen them connect on short routes and a couple deep down the field. So the sky's the limit for this player. And if he's able to get that blocking technique sorted out and really disguise that look in that 12 personnel, I think it can bring this offense to a whole nother level.
So now we'll start with a high and a very exciting part. Now I'm going to ask, I've been telling myself that some of the reports I've seen and some of the things I watch myself was because of the depth and the talent of the defensive line. How much do you think the performance that we've seen and the pretty consistent pressure on the quarterbacks have been the talent and depth on the defensive line? Or do you think maybe we do have some questions and concern on the offensive line, especially in the depth of that offensive line?
Yeah, I think you hit it right in the head. I think it's a good mix of both, or maybe a bad mix of both if you're looking at it from the offensive line's perspective. There's not a lot of depth there, especially on the outside, beyond Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown at the tackle position. David Quessenberry really hasn't inspired much confidence, neither has Brandon Shell when he's been in there with the second and third team. Quessenberry saw some time with the first team when Deion Dawkins went out of practice the other day, but really have not inspired much confidence, those two. Inside, there's a little bit more depth, but I think there's definitely cause for concern on the offensive side of the ball up front with so many new pieces and Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown trying to rebound from relatively down years last season. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement up front offensively, but you mentioned it. On the defensive side of the ball, it could be just a factor of that's how much improved the Bills are defensively up front. Leonard Floyd has been wreaking havoc. Greg Rousseau seems to have taken a step forward. And one player I'm really impressed with is A.J. Epinesa. You saw the confidence come through him last year, a 6-sack season, I believe, and really took a step forward apparently last year. And I think he's taken another step during this training camp, and I think he's set to contribute a bit more than he has in past moving forward.
So as we look at some of these items here, whether it's something that you've seen in camp so far or whether it's going to be something you're targeting looking at the preseason matchups here, how about some of these position battles? We'll start with, while we're talking about the offensive line, I can't tell if it's sprinkling in or a genuine battle between O'Cyrus Torrence and Ryan Bates. Some of it seems to be just because they want to get Bates looks at center, so Torrence is the guy that comes in, but then there's been a couple days where the rotation would have been to go back to Bates, and Torrence got a couple more reps there. Do you think that's a legitimate battle, or do you think it's just someone they value highly and are getting some extra reps to see how he looks?
I would say all signs have pointed to it being a legitimate battle. It depends on who you ask, whether you think Ryan Bates or O'Cyrus Torrence is going to win the job. I personally think Ryan Bates is in position to win the job out of training camp. You look back at Deion Dawkins to start his career, Spencer Brown to start his career. Even those players did not start initially their rookie year. They played a couple snaps their first couple weeks, maybe first 2 or 3 weeks, and then got in there in the starting lineup after the first couple weeks. I think you might see the same thing happen with O'Cyrus Torrence. I think they have finally want him to take over that job, but to begin the season, I think they're comfortable with Bates, and although they like his versatility at center, he's kind of been a mainstay within that first team, especially during that scrimmage, the red and blue at Highmark Stadium, and in the following days. And Osiris Torrence really struggled a bit today in pass protection. And I think there's been not cause for concern with Torrence, but there's definitely been some blemishes there throughout camp. And I'm not sure he's blown anybody away to the point where he'd be a shoo-in for the starting job out of camp. And I think because of that, they may be apt to start Bates at that position coming out to start the regular season.
Yeah, and a piece of it seems to me that it could make sense. I almost like him in that Bobby Hart sixth man line, because it seems like all of his early skill is going to apply to his run blocking, and that with how pass heavy we are, Bates seems to be a materially better, pass blocker. So regular 5-man offensive line, let's go with that. But if you're bringing in an extra guy, he has so much power to bring in that setting that I kind of like the idea of using him in those jumbo sets, Gilliam, 2 tight ends, jumbo offensive line with the 6 linemen. Maybe that's a way. Last year, we got Bobby Hart like 150 snaps on the season. It might be a good way to kind of get him in there, and whether that's the whole season or whether we have kind of a Ramon Humber, Matt Milano situation where it's the first half of the season, you have the veteran and then the rookie comes along as it goes. It could be interesting to see that. Looking at the third wide receiver spot, it was something where I was kind of following the money early on, in that, we paid Deontay Hardy a good amount of money, and I've been impressed with him. I think that there is for sure a role there, but it seems like every day there's another report that Trent Sherfield's not going down without a fight, and then you'll have another nice play from Khalil Shakir. It almost feels like they're going to force them to involve 5 receivers in the offense. Do you think there will be a winner, declared and like, hey, this is our third guy? Or do you think all the guys are playing well enough that we might see not a rotation, but that maybe there's a bit more involvement for the 4th and 5th guy than what we've seen in past years?
Yeah, certainly. And I think the skill level is there from whoever the 4th and 5th guy ends up being too. And I think Khalil Shakir and Trent Sherfield right now, I think, are the top 2 in competition for that wide receiver 3 spot. And I think Sherfield has been more impressive than Shakir throughout camp, at least more consistently. Shakir dropped another pass today. He's let a few passes go off his hands and a few 50-50 balls he just hasn't been able to come up with, whether it be in the end zone during one-on-ones or during team drills. And Sherfield, you saw that catch from him on the great throw from Josh Allen the other day. He's had a lot of great moments like that throughout training camp, and really seems to be an ascending player. And they really seem to like what he can, or the capability that he has within this offense. But I think it comes down to those 2 for wide receiver 3, with Deontay Hardy maybe mixed in as a little bit of a gadget player. His size at that position, I'm not sure if he has the capability to stick around in that role full time. So maybe mixing him in a little bit more with the other 2 kind of manning that position more in a full-time role. But I think this preseason and how Shakir and Sherfield perform, I think will go a long way to determining who kind of comes out as a winner per se in that competition.
And I know prior to obviously the unfortunate incident with Nyheim Hines, it seemed like it was going to be maybe Hines' kick return and Hardy as punt return. Now, from everything that I've seen and heard, it seems to be Hardy's the first guy in line for both of those every time they go through reps. Does it appear he's the lead kick and punt returner?
Yeah, they named him first on the depth chart in both positions. I know that you can kind of take that with a grain of salt at this point of the preseason, but I think in this situation, that might be a sign of things to come. And Ken Dorsey touched on it during his press conference earlier today. I think it was John Scott that asked him a question about whether or not using him on special teams in a return role may impact his role on the offense. And Dorsey commented how you might be a little bit reticent to use the guy who's returning kicks for you or punts for you on the first play of a drive after he comes off from a long return, maybe a little bit winded, or his long return may set you up in a different position on the field than you anticipated being. So I think his role on special teams may impact his role on offense, going back to your last question. And I think he's definitely got a leg up in that race now with Hines being out and his athleticism and just his burst and just his explosiveness.
One last thing on the offensive side here before we talk about some of the defense and some of the battles over there. Kind of similar to my question or curiosity with the defensive line versus the offensive line. I'm curious how much you think that some of the poor play or concern we've seen with the backup quarterback role, how much of that is, hey, maybe we don't have as good of a backup quarterback as what we've had before, and how much is it, maybe some of those, less than starting caliber linemen and some of the depth receivers and weapons. I'm curious if we think, hey, they may need to make a call to Carson Wentz, or maybe we think like Kyle Allen might look a little bit better if it's Mitch Morse and Deion Dawkins and throwing to Stephon Diggs.
It's certainly tough to take a lot away from the second and third team reps, no matter what position you're looking at. But there's no doubt there's been struggles from both Kyle Allen and Matt Barkley throughout training camp. Kyle Allen, first year in a new system, a lot to handle throughout the preseason and OTAs even before that, where a lot of the offense is installed. So now he's really getting his first opportunity to put all that knowledge that he's gained to use. But there certainly have been apparent struggles from Kyle Allen. He's had struggles even receiving snaps. So I think the concerns for the quarterback 2 position certainly are valid. But at the same time, if you lose Josh Allen for any extended period of time, I'm not sure there's really any road back to success. I think all you're looking for from a backup quarterback in the Bills' circumstances, maybe Allen goes out for a game or two and maybe they do enough to tread water. But at the same time, I think the Bills are experienced enough at the coaching position. They have enough talent around the quarterback position that no matter how much struggles we've seen from these 2 players throughout training camp, I think with that talent around them and with the experience at the coaching staff, I think there'll be enough to lighten the load on those players if they're thrust into that situation come regular season.
I think that's spot on. And I felt that way, that with this defense, the run game, weapons like Stephon Diggs and with the others on offense, they're in a position where I think they can beat a Chicago, an Arizona, a Washington, some of those the early season games where it looks like, the Washington teams like that, where I think they have a good shot. And later on, I don't think it matters who the backup quarterback is when we get into the stretch of Philadelphia, Cincinnati, Kansas City, that, it's kind of relative, that it's just the timing. Hopefully Josh plays every single game. We don't ever miss a snap. He hasn't missed a start in his career, since that early concussion against New England. So being in that kind of position, I think we need to hope, but all our eggs are in that basket. I don't know that it really matters what things happen. If we lose Josh Allen, all is for naught. If we have Josh Allen, all things are possible. It's kind of the way that it goes. Switch. Anything else on the offensive side that were in your notes or that interest you? Maybe in the backfield. Anything that stuck out? I heard that even at 33 years old, Latavius Murray still has a little bit of juice.
Yeah, no doubt. Damian Harris went out with a knee injury late in practice the other day. I caught him going off to the sideline, but I didn't think it was significant enough to report on. Good thing other members of the beat, Buffalo News and The Athletic, reported on it. And sure enough, Harris was absent from today's practice. One of, I believe, only 3 players not even on the field. He, Cam Lewis, and Reggie Gilliam all perhaps getting treatment in the facility. But, yeah, Latavius Murray caught 2 balls in the flat today. One of them turned into a 30-yard gain, and the other one turned into about a 70-yard touchdown. He was pretty wide open on the 70-yard touchdown, but you could see just the afterburners turn on from that 33-year-old, certainly playing well below his years, I would say, at least today, given that opportunity. And his power has been apparent throughout camp, and I certainly think there's something there. He's a unicorn. He's been around forever. He continues to produce solid seasons, and if Harris is to miss extended time, and we've seen him deal with injury issues throughout his young career. So I think Murray is just waiting in the wings to make an impact. But really the story in the backfield has been James Cook. His explosiveness and big playability has been on display more often than not. He has shown some inconsistency in pass blocking, but he did rebound with a nice session in the 2-on-2, 1-on-1 session the other day. But his big playability is there, and I think if he's given an adequate workload, I think you're going to see a big season from James Cook.
I agree. I think Cook has looked really exciting. It was more explosion and quickness than I remembered.
Oh, look who's in the comments, Greg.
Aaron's getting jealous. He didn't want me spending too much time with another.
There he is. I didn't know they had Wi-Fi up there in Maine in the forest.
So, as we look on the defensive side of the ball, there's, I think the defensive line is just going to be a rotation. We'll see. I think it's going to become a battle of how many people they keep. You already mentioned some of the flashes from AJ Epinesa, new guys like Leonard Floyd, the kind of a little more thickness from Gregory Rousseau. At the interior with the defensive tackles, I've seen kind of a steady drumbeat of disruption from Ed Oliver. I'm hoping we see kind of the healthy version of him back. I know it's kind of tough when it's not always full go. How have some of the other guys, Daquan Jones, Poona Ford, some of the others of the defensive tackle group looked?
Yeah, Daquan Jones is as steady as they come. He is a force in the middle. You saw how much the Bills lost in his absence during that game against the Bengals in the playoffs, and his return during preseason OTAs and training camp, it's really been apparent. He's a force up front, and I agree with Ed Oliver. It's going to be interesting to see if he can stay healthy. He's already dealt with some bumps and bruises throughout training camp, missing a couple of practices here the past couple of days with back soreness. Hopefully he can get back on track. Poona Ford has splashed a bit. One thing I'm interested to see, though, up front, they do have such a crowded room. Is there room to showcase a couple of these players during the preseason and perhaps attract some other teams for trades to gain some depth at other positions where it may be lacking? And I think two candidates for that role throughout the preseason, Tim Settle and Boogie Basham. I think those two players are kind of in a logjam for playing time, although Settle is listed ahead of Ford on that preseason depth chart. I think the Bills are going to be more apt to put Ford in a more significant role than they are Settle. And that may just be a product of what I'm saying. Maybe they're getting ready to showcase him and maybe a couple of other players during the preseason in hopes of attracting other teams, because they certainly have a lot of talent both at the defensive tackle and edge positions. And there's not going to be enough food to go around. There's too many mouths to feed, as they say. So yeah, they need to figure something out there. And I think it would behoove them to look for a trade with one of those players and maybe bring in some depth at other positions. Namely, I know it's tough to find quality depth on the offensive line, but if there's any chance of getting any type of player up front on offense, I think you have to pounce at that opportunity.
So I'm going to give a quick shout out to our guy, Uber Hansen, does a lot of research for us, and he had a suggestion that I was 100% in on, whether it's a draft pick going out and us recouping a draft pick or a straight up trade. Arizona, who took Paris Johnson in the first round, has Kelvin Beachum on a very cheap, reasonable contract. A 34-year-old guy. They're not going anywhere. I don't think they're in a position to do that, and I think Beachum would be a material upgrade over either Quessenberry or Brandon Shell. He's a guy that has some legitimate experience and has been in pretty decent positions over the last couple of years, starting for Pittsburgh and the Jets, and now the last little bit here with Arizona. I think he would be a guy that I'd feel a little bit better with. And whether it's sending, I could see a rebuilding team like Arizona interested in taking on the last 2 years of a rookie deal of Boogie Basham to see if they can get something for a guy who's obviously not in their long-term plan. So shout out to Uber, because I thought that was a really interesting approach, because you're right, there are not a lot of available offensive linemen out there, and certainly not teams who are looking to move them if they do have it. And Arizona might be the one exception where they're in such a rebuild mode that maybe they would actually move a guy, especially when they invested a first-round pick there. So real quick here before we move on to our next topic, I want to give a shout out to one of our new sponsors, Leftern. We're very excited to be able to work with them. Going to be in a position to be talking to them in person. They're going to be hosting a block party coming up on the Saturday, September 16th, right before the Bills homecoming, an actual real block party. He was there, doing official things, working with the mayor and getting the actual area blocked off. So the surrounding 500 block area of downtown Buffalo, we're going to be there with a bunch of the businesses having a homecoming, block party. Aaron and I are going to be there doing a live show. We're going to do our best to maybe invite Mr. Brasky to come out and visit with us for a little bit there, but make sure you're coming out, checking it out. Also, in the show description here, I put a drop for their season package for all of their posters. Obviously, Aaron and I are going to be debuting their coming week poster each week in our preview matchup. I said before, like, obviously, whenever someone's sponsoring us, we're going to say nice things about them. But the nice part about working with Leftern is we've actually been fans of them for a long time. I have multiple of their, printed sheets in my office here because I've loved a lot of their work previously. So obviously, he finds all kinds of different creators and artists throughout the Buffalo area, 17 different artists for 17 different weeks. Each matchup has a new poster. We're going to be debuting it here on the Cover One preview show each week as we get ready for those matchups. And Aaron and I are really excited to be working with a company like Leftern for our new sponsor for this year. So make sure you check it out and come out and see Aaron and I at the block party on the home opener weekend on September 16th.
Yeah, and I got to see how quickly you guys work. I think I saw that all come to pass all within like a day's time. I think they hit you guys up on Twitter, and next thing you know, you're hosting a block party. So
Aaron and I are available for all kinds of things. You can pay us to say all kinds of things. Anyone who would like to pay us to say nice things. It's nice when we actually like the company, like Leftern, but I'm willing to say all kinds of things. You can pay me to say all kinds of things. As we continue on into the defense here, one of the battles that I've kind of condition myself that, hey, I think no matter what, we're going to have a pretty good option at right guard. No matter what, we're going to have a pretty good option at third receiver. We'll get to cornerback. I think the floor is pretty high there. We're going to have pretty good play there. The one that I'm the least sure of is at that linebacker spot. Middle linebacker, we've seen initially it was kind of a three-man battle where we had Terrell, Dodson, Terrell Bernard, and Balin Spector. It seems like Balin Spector's maybe taken a half step back, and now it's really between Dodson and Bernard. What have you seen in the back and forth day-to-day? Obviously, we know Dodson has a little more thump to him, a little bit better coming downhill playing in the run. Bernard a little bit better in coverage. Where have you seen that battle ebb and flow back and forth?
Yeah, I think it's Dodson's to lose entering these 3 preseason games. He has, it seems, further command of the defense, seems to be a little bit more comfortable out there calling the defense. And like you said, he's just a more physical player. Terrell Bernard, you heard about his size, the concerns about his size coming out of the draft. And as I've watched him over these past 2 years, he really is a smaller guy at that position. He almost looks like a safety out there. And although that allows him to move around a little bit more freely and kind of close on players in open space a little bit better than a Tyrel Dodson would, I'm not sure he has what it takes to stand up against the running game and to take on blocks of these big offensive linemen at the second level and shed those and make the plays that he needs to when there's running backs coming at him. So I think it would behoove the Bills to choose Dodson as their starter to at least begin the season. And I think he's got a leg up in the competition. I think he's been more consistent. He's had a few more big plays, like I said, against the run, while Bernard has maybe splashed a bit more in pass coverage. But I think it's Dodson's job to lose at this point. And Terrell Bernard's going to have to do a lot during these preseason games to inspire enough confidence for, I think, the Bills to put him in that starting role to begin the season. Although you may see something that you haven't seen from the Bills in the past with Tremaine Edmonds. You may see Bernard come in on a few passing downs for Dodson if he does earn that starting job. That's something to keep an eye out for as well, whether we'll see not a platoon at that position, but maybe a somewhat of a rotation at that position, perhaps on passing downs, obvious passing downs, that is, to give Bernard a chance to really flourish in his skill set, that is.
So taking that one step further, do you think we could even see a third name in that kind of rotation situationally with how they've been using Taylor Rapp? That's maybe a position last year we saw virtually no dime snaps, and part of that was I think they learned quickly that Jaquan Johnson wasn't the level of player they were hoping for, so they didn't really have a third safety to be able to mix in for those kind of things, and we've struggled for a while to find an actual backup to Taron Johnson. But now we've seen Taylor Rapp out there taking straight nickel snaps when there's 2 safeties behind him. We've seen him be a backup in a second and third team safety. We've seen some different looks. I almost wonder if that's another area to platoon that you bring in a Taylor Rapp in situations like that.
Yeah, certainly. And it's tough to gauge what Rapp's impact might be because it's training camp and they're not going full contact. And I think that's really going to be his strength in this defense, coming up and delivering a blow on a runner or in that short passing game and really providing that physical presence from a defensive back that undoubtedly they did not have with Jaquan Johnson at that position. So I think it's going to be, like I said, with the two linebackers. I think Taylor Rapp's role in this defense will really it'll come into focus throughout this preseason as he is out there in full contact situations and in this new Sean McDermott called defense. I think there are going to be maybe not drastic changes, but I think there's going to be minimal changes in terms of the team's aggressiveness. It's been well discussed throughout training camp. It's no secret that a lot of people think this defense is going to be more aggressive. And I think the two players that are really going to benefit from that potential aggressiveness are Taylor Rapp and Taron Johnson. I think Taron Johnson, I said it to a few people the other day, I think he is going to be perhaps the X factor in the Sean McDermott defense. The way that he can do so many different things from that nickel cornerback position, is a really physical player, a quick player coming off the edge, his great awareness on the blitz, can also drop back into pass coverage. And although he's not a Tre'Davious White in pass coverage, he's certainly adequate when he drops back, and he's shown that throughout training camp and really seems to be progressing in that respect this year as well, seems to have taken a step forward. So I think Taylor Rapp for sure, but Taron Johnson, both of those players I think are going to be key to what could be a little bit of a new look defense for the Bills under Sean McDermott's play calling.
Aaron's so mad that he missed the show and people were saying nice things about Taron Johnson.
He's tingling inside, I see.
You know, hey, you make him feel feelings. So the
I've been
last
known to do that.
the last battle that we haven't gotten to here is maybe one of the most hotly debated, because you get into, I think, people have in my opinion, an unfair recollection of what Dane Jackson was last year, where I think there were limitations on his ceiling. I do think that there were teams that tried to go after him, but the guy had 10 pass breakups and actually had all advanced metrics show reasonably starting caliber play. You then had some of the excitement of Christian Benford, and then obviously the potential and the desire for what people want. Last year's first round pick, Kaiir Elam, 6 feet 1 inches, ran a 4.39 40. And from our eyes, we don't see practice and some of the things that maybe John Butler expressed of him needing to get better from a practice standpoint. When he was on the field in games, he played well, made some really big plays in playoff games, to be able to, being attacked and having him, sniff out the screen that they tried to break with Tyreek Hill and going after him in some other plays. Where do you fall on, one, the idea that, hey, whether his draft status should matter or not, or two, what you've seen from the play of those guys out on the field with that second cornerback spot?
Well, I certainly think Kaiir Elam's draft status comes into play, but he just simply has not been consistent enough to put a stranglehold on that position. If you were to ask me who's been the most consistent player throughout camp, it's undoubtedly been Dane Jackson. And I think the player that's shown the most flashes has been Christian Benford. I think Kaiir Elam by no means has had a horrible training camp, but none of these players have stood out and really separated themselves. And the other two, I think, like I said, with Jackson more consistent, and Benford, the interceptions in recent days has really been standing out recently. So Kaiir Elam, I think that the team certainly wants their former first-round pick to win the job, but he just has not done enough to put a stranglehold on that position, as I said. And much like I said with Dodson, going into the season with uncertainty at that position and with a roster that's capable of winning a Super Bowl, I'm not sure you're going to be willing to put a player in a position where you're hoping he sinks or swims. I think you're going to put a Dane Jackson in there, like Aaron is alluding to in the comments, kind of the new Levi Wallace, where they can just trust him. They know that he lacks a little bit in physical ability, and his ceiling certainly isn't what a Kaiir Elam's would be, but his consistency and just how steady he is within that system and knowing the system, and he just provides that level of trust that Sean McDermott covets from really every position, both defensively and offensively. So I think much like Dodson right now, I think Dane Jackson may be the front runner, but still a lot of preseason work left to be done. And not like previous years where you have a lot of these positions kind of solidified for a Super Bowl caliber team. That middle linebacker and cornerback position are going to be interesting to watch throughout these 3 games.
And I think for one thing, for fans, obviously, I don't think it's going to be perfect. I think that we're going to see some growing pains from both spots, depending on who wins the cornerback 2 spot, and for sure for who wins the linebacker spot. Because I think there's a chance we have the long-term answers at starter and depth at corner on the roster. I'm not sure we have the long-term answer at linebacker on the roster. I think we might have the best guy that we're going to have for this year, and we hope maybe one of those guys turns into being the long-term answer, and that would be great. But I'm not sure that we have that there. The one thing each of them will benefit from is that in the back, you're going to have an umbrella with a healthy Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, who seem to be playing at their elite level. You have Trey White back seeming to be at his, elite level. You have Matt Milano and Taron Johnson. And then ideally, you have waves of talent on the defensive line disrupting the other team so that they're not hung out there to dry, to be in a position where they have to stay in coverage for 4, 5, 6 seconds. So hopefully some of the other talent around them can make it sufficient, and that we have an offense that can make up for some mistakes or some scores that are given up and be in a position to survive it. But I think it is going to be one of the biggest challenges on this team is those 2 spots on the defensive side of the ball.
And like Aaron is saying, I think they will rotate that position almost undoubtedly to begin the season. I think you might see Dane Jackson out there to start, but they did it last year, and nothing really has changed from last year. So I think you will see a rotation in that position, maybe at least for the first few weeks, if nobody steps up throughout the preseason. If one of those 3 really steps up and performs extremely well, noticeably well throughout the preseason, that may be something that changes that. But I think right now you're definitely looking at a potential rotation in that position to begin the season.
And I think that leads into this question from Sarah Christine here saying, I'm just curious, if we didn't want an athletic cornerback that excels at man but not in zone, then why'd we draft one in the first? I think that there are things where obviously they're hoping that they can help with that nuance and understanding in zone coverage, but there's also situations where having, different quarterbacks that you can play more man defense against, you can deploy a Kaiir Elam, and maybe there's other situations where it's more zone where you need a Dane Jackson or a Christian Benford that can give them some matchup plays there. And obviously you hope one guy takes a stranglehold on the job and runs with it, but it can give them a little bit of matchup optionality early on in the season.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think Dane Jackson and Christian Benford, they're very comfortable with those two in the system that they play. So perhaps looking for a bit of diversity when they drafted Elam. Also, this team really drafts traits a lot of the time. They draft traits, and Elam had all the traits. And they really, I heard it, I can't remember what program I was listening to, but sometimes, I don't know if hubris is the right word, or this is the word that was used on the program, and they said they weren't sure if it was the right word, but the defensive coaching staff's ability to coach these players up and really get them to play above their draft position or what they're drafted as, I think impacts how they view these players coming out of the draft as well. And perhaps they thought, hey, we'll get Elam in here, we'll coach him up, and he'll figure it out. But that certainly hasn't been the case in terms of zone coverage. And there's even been times throughout camp that he struggled in man coverage. But at the same time, it is training camp. I'm really excited to see the preseason and how these cornerbacks perform.
Yeah, very much so. So we'll see where that one goes. And that leads into kind of the final topic here. It's a little almost anticlimactic going into some of these preseason games, because this Bills roster, besides a couple position groups, is one of the most defined 53-man rosters I can remember in a while. There's just not a ton of you look at the running back group, you look at wide receiver, you look at tight end, you look like there's just a ton of positions where, okay, I do wonder, is it 9 or 10 offensive linemen? Is it 9 or 10 defensive linemen? Is it an extra DB? But other than like one spot of Quessenberry versus Shell, maybe versus Cam Lewis or someone like that, I'm really struggling to figure out where is the drama that we're going to watch as we get close to the cutdown day. Is there anybody that you think has an outside shot to really show out in preseason here to either make a case for a 53-man roster spot, or maybe, like you talked about, one of those cutdown day trades, or at minimum that we'd be nervous about getting him back on the practice squad?
Tyrel Shavers.
Ooh.
The guy has been flashing since day one. And on the other side of the coin, rookie Justin Shorter has really not made many plays that have stood out. And today he dropped the ball where a defender fell in coverage and it hit him right in the hands, and he dropped it right over the middle during red zone work. So Tyrel Shavers and the way that he's been performing, and listen, this was a highly touted prospect, I believe, coming out of high school, and then kind of fell off a little bit in college, but the Bills like him. He's got great size, and the Bills have been looking for a sizable receiver for years now under Sean McDermott. And the way that he's performed throughout training camp, if he continues throughout the preseason, you could see a surprise there where Shavers, I think it would be a big surprise, but you could see Shavers maybe supplant Shorter for that final spot at wide receiver. And it's simply just due to how well Shavers has been performing. A rookie wide receiver during training camp, it's tough to look too far into that and judge him too critically, but Shavers on the other side of the coin as an undrafted rookie, he's really shined.
Well, and you talk about a guy that, you understand, you see him, one of the only guys who can actually stand up to Justin Shorter. He's almost 6'5", 215, something like that, and was at a position where, like you talked about, a huge prospect going to Alabama. If you're a wide receiver and you get recruited to go to Alabama, obviously you're a big time player. And then, because of some of the depth there, you see him transfer. He didn't quite translate the way they thought, but you never know. Maybe there is kind of a late blossoming position there. And I think that's almost the exact same story that people tell themselves to Justin Shorter, that, hey, huge recruit coming out of high school, didn't quite pan out, but maybe some of the physical skills can translate. Maybe we had the right story with the wrong guy coming out of there, and can see maybe a little bit more of a battle for that sixth wide receiver spot.
And Charles brings up a good point. If Shavers is going to offer that ability as a gunner on special teams, that certainly could push him over the edge in that race if Shorter continues to, I wouldn't say underperform, but maybe fail to stand out as he has over the past few weeks.
Yeah, and again, as Charles pointed out here, almost the identical path that we talked about with Justin Shorter, where, hey, especially we talked about those top 5 receivers, there's not really an option for a sixth receiver to get much offensive workload here. Anybody coming in was going to have to compete, especially because Trent Sherfield is going to be out there as a gunner or personal protector, whatever it is, a key special teams role. Anybody else is going to need to earn spots there, and that was the assumption for Justin Shorter. If Terrell Shavers can match him in that spot, that the Bills are not shy to award those opportunities to the guy who puts in the work. So that's an interesting one to watch. Any other names you want to throw out there for fans to keep an eye on going into these preseason games? Maybe even if it's not a guy that you expect to make the roster, but maybe another name that's flashed like Shavers has for you in camp so far.
Andy Isabella, no doubt. When the Bills signed him, I thought he was just going to come in and catch punts and maybe be in the mix there, but he's doing all he can to get his hands on the ball during one-on-one drills, during team drills with the second and third team. He's come away with, I think, a catch or two in most practices that I've watched him out there. And he's a small guy, but much like Deontay Hardy, he can jump, he's quick, and he's physical, and he's not afraid to stick his nose in there. And if they do land him on the practice squad and something happens to Hardy and Isabella's thrust in there for an opportunity, I'm interested to see what he can do, because he's certainly shown the ability to make an impact throughout training camp, and to get him out there in a live game during the preseason, that'll also be interesting to see how he's incorporated.
All right, very, very good. So one last thing here. The chat's been awesome here tonight. I'll give you guys one more minute here to get some questions in for Alex before we let him go. And while we're waiting for those questions to come in here, I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about our fantastic new program here for One Pass. You can sign up. People talk all the time and ask us, what ways you can support us. And this is the best way to be able to support us. You can see the link in the show description here. Sign up to be a One Pass member. You're able to get in there. All kinds of different things. Again, we leave news breaking to people like Alex, but anytime we get little nuggets, we drop it into the Slack channel, let you know the things that we're hearing. Some of the guys, when we have players on the show, we hear little tidbits from them here and there. We drop those in the Slack channel for you guys, and that community has become a huge part of what we're really proud of, and how fans are able to interact with each other. We know not everyone loves the current environment on social media. We've built a really nice little bubble there for all the different Bills fans that want to come in and have a good time, to hear about the team, but not all the other things that come with social social media, you're able to jump in there and have a good time. We've got an awesome new t-shirt design for this year, plus a decal that we're going to send out. We're getting those ready right now to send out for everybody. So if you jump in for $60, it'll sign you up from now all the way through the draft, through free agency next year, this entire season. You'll be signed up with all that insight the whole way. My Salary Cap 101 series and those private videos on YouTube, the same thing with Eric's glossary series and all the different things that he takes you through. But a really good opportunity to be able to learn a little bit more and hang out with some good people. So make sure you give us a shot, sign up for one pass, and we'll appreciate that. All right, a couple last questions here. Steve talked earlier, and I know you had touched on this. You do think that Deontay Hardy is the guy for both jobs for the returners?
Yeah, I think at this point, I think they brought him in for a reason, and with Hines going out, I think this gives them an opportunity to see what he's got in that role consistently. And he's been out there. He's done a nice job. I mean, all you can really see during training camp is these guys catching the punts, so really not much to read into there. But like I've been saying about the preseason, we'll see him out there during the preseason, really see what he has to offer. But you see the highlights that have been splashed throughout social media since the Bills signed him. He's certainly got runaway capability, and I think the Bills are going to utilize him in that role.
The late Ralph Wilson Sr. jumping in the chat here to be able to help. Yeah, it's an honor that he would still come and listen to the show. Has Cook developed courage in his pass blocking skill set?
It's like your Greg Tompsett show memes or whatever. When you have the celebrities say they're dying to tune in, look at Ralph.
Hey, it's the kind of clientele that we encourage and recruit.
Right, but yeah, like I said earlier in the show, Cook struggled, I think, the first time I saw him in those pass blocking drills. And the next time I wasn't able to watch, but I did follow some of the other members of the beat, covered that portion of practice. And they did say that his ability in that regard did improve a bit. And I think that's going to be an ongoing thing for him. You didn't see him do that much in college. You didn't see him do that much last year. And I think he's willing to do it, and he's certainly willing to learn, and I think he's got the capability and the strength to do so. It's just going to be a matter of getting him those repetitions in live scenarios, and like Ralph is alluding to, developing that courage and continuing to gain confidence in that regard.
Yeah, I like it, and I think that he still is a barely 200-pound guy, and that quickness and explosion isn't always going to translate as the best pass blocker. But I think having some of those guys like Harris and Murray, and honestly, we've seen them use Dawson Knox in that role. They put him back there in some of those situations, and now some of that 12 personnel doesn't have to mean a 7-man line with 2 tight ends on each side of the line. Some of that can be creative usage where you have Kincaid out flexed in a slot, and then you have Dawson Knox in the backfield, and it's no running backs with the other 3 receivers, but you still have that pass blocker there where he can chip, pick up a block, or leak out just like a running back would. And having a guy with that blocking capability, it can be a sneaky usage to make sure that you get full snaps out of the contract we have for Dawson Knox and the draft investment for Dalton Kincaid. I think that can be a sneaky way that we can use those guys even further.
Right. And thank you to Mr. Goodberry for tuning in. He's certainly been generous with his following on social media. I appreciate the kind words, and great work on the new shirt with 26 shirts that they're doing out. It's really a good thing that the Goodberries do. This is one variant, I guess, and then the other one down in Cincinnati.
Yeah, his brother last night, I think, threw out the first pitch at the Cincinnati Reds game.
Not a great pitch. I think he tried to go submarine. Yeah. And it didn't quite work out, but I do appreciate the cojones giving it a college try.
I've got one of Glenn's hats right here. Big fan of the designs they did, and I love the new Mafia on the Brain shirt that they collaborated with 26 Shirts. It was a great call out. Yeah, great. All right. Anything final that you want to share with the folks, what they can see coming up next for you, whether at Batavia Daily or when they can expect something with the new project?
Yeah, continue to follow Alex Brasky on all social media. I put out my daily thoughts from training camp, and when it comes to regular season time, I'll have thoughts throughout the week, and then always thoughts post-game, and I have a pregame column that I do for each regular season game and preseason game for that matter. So continue to follow along, and you can log on to thedailynewsonline.com. We've been increasing our Bills coverage. Also, if you're from the Batavia area, we call it the Glow region, Genesee, Livingston, Orleans, Wyoming counties. We have the best high school sports coverage that you could ever find. If that strikes your fancy. And you mentioned it earlier, Bills Digest, a new opportunity for me. We're coming up with our season kickoff issue, which I think is going to be released, I believe, the first week of September, if I'm not mistaken, right before that first game. And then we'll have a midseason review, and then we really kick it into high gear. I saw someone at the beginning in the comments talk about our draft issue, and that's really where we make our bread and butter, covering free agency, covering the draft, and getting you ready for training camp the next year. So be sure to subscribe to Bills Digest and follow along with the Batavia Daily News. Sorry to go a little long-winded there.
No, it's awesome. I'm looking forward to it myself. So thank you very much to chat. You guys were awesome tonight. Even Aaron jumping in from tropical locales far away. We appreciate you guys very, very much. But on behalf of Alex Brasky, I am Greg Tompsett. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are